So Asmongold recently made a post on Twitter that got a pretty negative reaction, where he said that Palestinians had an inferior culture to the United States. So inferior as in, you know, the culture that they've developed basically in its entirety is inferior. I think we're just gonna watch the clip here, and we'll watch it from what I assume is Asmongold's favorite fan, Arena Jasmine. This racist piece of Asmongold, I just want that monetization money, went on Twitch live stream and said that Palestinian people are inferior, they aren't the same as us, and they have an inferior culture. Add Twitch support, why is he not banned? They're immediate. Get him out of here. Give him the Destiny treatment, out the window. Let's listen to the clip.
If you want to consider a genocide as a systematic killing of a group of people, they have genocide built into Sharia law right now. So no, I'm not going to cry a fucking river when people who have genocide that's baked into their laws are getting genocided. I don't give a fuck. They're terrible people. It's not even a question. It's crazy that people don't see it that way. They'd be doing the same thing.
I love while he's doing this rant, you can ever so slightly hear the tavern music from like Skyrim playing in the background. Do, 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 do. Palestinians inferior culture. Do, 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 do. It's just, it's a true Asmongold moment. Need the Diet Coke.
How much did they kill? As many as they can. They're not able to kill as many people as Israel because they don't have as many bombs and as many weapons. But if they did, they'd be doing the same thing. That's it. Just takes enough. That's right. These people are not your allies. They are not the same as us. They come from an inferior culture that is horrible. It kills people for their identity, and it is directly antithetical to everything Western values stand for, and it is an inferior culture in all ways.
Always.
It is that simple. No, I don't feel bad for them. I don't feel sorry for them. I don't care. I don't support them.
Okay, so that is the Asmongold clip. One second, let me go get a water. So let me say something quick. Okay, so the crux of his argument, and I'll just get through this quickly because I want to watch the conversation with Hasan, because Hasan critiqued this pretty hard. Obviously, it's not a big surprise. And then Hasan, of course, when it's Asmongold, the person who is not, you know, really that deep in the politics and is not an expert on any of these topics, when it's him, invite him on a stream like that to debate. If it's anybody else, or for example, the Ukrainians who have been critiquing his commentary for 2 years plus now, nah, just ignore that. I'm not going to talk to them. They have war trauma. I don't want to talk to them. No, that would be nice. You know, but of course, bring the Houthi pirate on stream. That trauma doesn't matter because he can talk about his favorite anime. Yeah. Anyway, he has Asmongold come on his stream to debate. So I just want to we're going to watch that. Still a little miffed that it's Asmongold and still not anybody who actually, you know, knows what they're talking about. Not trying to be mean to Asmongold, but come on. Here's my crux. He says because the Gaza Hamas leaders have instituted laws that kill homosexuals and off them, that is a genocide of gay people. And while some people in the international law community, this is me commentating quick, you know, they might dispute that, put that as beside the point. And because they're doing that, it's kind of weird to see the LGBT activists in the West advocate, or really anyone advocate for these people who are doing LGBT genocide and advocate on behalf of those people because their culture is inferior in all ways. Now, number one, just because a country has bigotry or even like legalized and forced bigotry, that doesn't mean their culture is inferior in all ways. Because the culture encompasses everything. And to say that every part of Palestinian culture is inferior to American culture, you don't think I could find like certain aspects of like localized community and ways that people support each other that might be better than like some individualist aspects of the West and very consumerist mindset? I'm sure I could find something. You don't think there's any, if that's really your perspective, then I don't think your eyes are wide enough to the world. And look, I think there's cultures in the world that have a lot of problems. I think the Russian culture obviously has a lot of problems with imperialism. But if you don't think there's anything within that mass that could ever be learned from any aspect of any culture, then I think that is just discounting the trial and error experiences of how civilizations develop to certain conditions that could be useful to us, or different positive aspects of people. And I think that that is important to remember and important to look for if you want to see the human being and the humanity in other people. Is to try to remember that there is still positive aspects of these communities and these peoples that they've developed and that they value. And the value because it's theirs, even if it's as simple as it was like cultural songs or food, stuff that's beautiful because it was creative and amazing and helped them expand their worldview in some way, allowed them to feel some sense of community. So I just reject that statement outright. That doesn't mean that there can't be certain aspects of culture that inferior or superior to others from my prescriptive moral worldview, right? But I just don't like this complete hand waving. I think it's bad, and I think that the critique over it is probably justified. As for like the gay genocide stuff, obviously I think Hamas's policies towards homosexuals is bad. If I was there, I'd be killed if it was known, unless I was very well connected and corrupt and they could keep it hush hush. And it's forced a lot of people to be underground with their love. But you could also be critical of Israeli policy, because if the statement we're going to go with is their culture is bad in this way, therefore we cannot advocate against the violence, then I'm in the position where it's like Ukrainian society, while better on LGBT issues by miles and a half than Hamas, because like I can be openly gay here, and while people will give me a side eye, and you know the right sector and the RDK will be like rah, 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 rah. I have some amount of civil rights here. I can protest, I can advocate for myself, so can other LGBT people. And you know, there was anti-discrimination work protections implemented in 2015, 2016, but wider society is still homophobic. Wider society is still homophobic. And I think in America, we're more gay accepting. Does that mean now, like, it's like, well, you know, if Russia's coming in, I don't want to advocate on this culture. This is 100% of my culture. No, because I think at the end of the day, increasing the suffering of the Ukrainian people does not help gay people in any feasible way. In fact, many of the people getting bombed here, as is the case also in Palestine, are going to be gays blowing up, because it's not like they're gay avoiding bombs or like bombs that, you know, don't kill them as well. And so I think that, you know, the basic survival needs of these people need to be adhered to and taken care of. And so you can still advocate based on their humanity, not based on certain bigoted aspects of their culture. So that's my disagreement and what it's based on. Anyway, now that I've explained my position, wait, let me look at any response in chats. If people are like, Dylan, I hate that, Dylan, you're wrong. Rah. It's funny he went in this hard since he usually says nothing out of the states matter. Yeah, Asmongold is a milquetoast take haver on politics. Says a lot of very surface level stuff. I mean, honestly, I prefer it that way. I think if you have a surface level like takes on politics, you should be giving surface level ass opinions. I think that makes sense. You should moderate your own knowledge, understand your strengths and weaknesses, not pretend you know more than you really do. Anyway, let's now move over to the debate he had with Hasan, because I gotta say, I think while Hasan, I probably agree with him on this, I don't know if he's the best person to make this argument. Because, like, for example, I wouldn't agree with invading Gaza just to, like, save the gays.
Do crimes. Love you, buddy.
Hey, thank you for the $5. I appreciate it. But I also think that, like, it's going to be weird to see Hasan debating from a position of superiority here, since he has previously taken a position that, well, China invading Tibet was actually okay because of their feudal system. And because of their feudal system that was abolished by the Chinese, that justifies the invasion, because they were getting rid of their backward ways of the Tibetans. And while their feudal system was bad, very bad, does that justify Chinese expansionism of them getting rid of de facto autonomous country for like 3-4 decades that was able to rule itself? Why not go and crack down on that and then pull out? Why stay in? And so for me, it's just like a weird position for him to be in, because I've seen him argue from a kind of more Asmongoldish position before. It's not exactly the same, but I just don't know how these two takes vibe together. Anyway, and that's not to say there's never a good, like fighting the South to end slavery was good. I think that was good. but there's also not like we're distinctly un-American Southerners with their own hair. No, there was like they had their own heritage in some ways, but like we're destroying slavery. There wasn't like a history of the South being its own independent country with its own independent culture, with its own independent religious traditions. No, it has its own. Like Southern iced tea is not its own faith or its own language. Okay, it's like there's certain like intricacies of different parts of the South, but it wasn't like we're gonna have the French Baton Rouge break off. No, and so I never liked that comparison from Hasan. I never really did. Never really did. So let's go watch this Asmongold Hasan debate. The Asmongold drama 10 hours ago. By the way, Asmongold has been banned from Twitch. I do want you guys to know that. So he's gonzo. Okay.
I can hear you. All right. Asmon.
Okay. Yes.
In the interest of fairness, I want you to explain what you said that I saw in limited clips earlier today, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so basically, I find it to be really problematic that people put like a lot of virtue signaling, and I think it is virtue signaling, for people that are supportive for like trans rights and LGBT rights when they support.
I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I don't know how educational this debate's gonna be. I just want to throw that out front. If you're here, you got your notepad out, you're like, I'm gonna learn today on the Dylan Burns TV show. We'll see. Maybe we'll learn something. We'll try to make something informative out of this, but I'm not an expert on Israel-Palestine, and sometimes I get critiqued because I don't talk about it enough, but I also don't want to talk about things I don't have any frame of reference for it or don't know that much more on than anybody else that's talking about it, probably better than I can. So take that from me as I'm delving into this, that this is not the issue I concentrate on. I obviously have been concentrating on European affairs and American-European relations and America's relationship with Ukraine specifically, and of course the war. I've been more focused on that. So I just want to put that out there. I don't want to give too shallow commentary, but if we've got Asmongold, Hasan, and me in the same room, maybe that makes one informed person about the war.
Countries that kill people and prosecute them for being LGBT. I think it's a huge problem, and I don't think you can have both of those things.
So when you were saying like Palestinians exhibit inferior culture that's barbaric, you were simply talking about the hypocrisy. Is that what it is?
Yeah, pretty much. I do. And somebody in my chat said that you said that I thought Christian theocracy was better.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, what a fucking surprise. Okay. Well, here's the thing, right? Yeah, go ahead.
I want you to like fully explain, because I want to understand everything that you mean beyond the hypocrisy, because like the hypocrisy version or the hypocrisy in and of itself is one thing that we can address. It's a super simple concept.
Well,
but I think there's always a broader point beyond hypocrisy, because online hypocrisy in and of itself, or even the invocation of hypocrisy or perceived hypocrisy, is seemingly a more damaging thing than like actual material harm, right? Oh, this person is hypocritical, and that's like a very common fucking thing. Yeah. I'm sure you experience it on a regular basis as well. It doesn't really matter.
Most hypocrisy, I think, is derived from a misunderstanding that is often deliberate. I see it oftentimes with you. You've seen it with me. Everybody has it happen. It's extremely common on the internet.
It's the Andrew Tate phenomenon, right? Where people don't give a fuck about like what Andrew Tate may have done or may not have done, or all the shit that he has definitely done, right? And care more about like, perceived hypocrisy. Usually, they care more about that than anything else. So I don't
I think there's a Norm Macdonald clip about that. It was very good.
Yeah, I don't necessarily care about hypocrisy that much, but in terms of the hypocrisy of the matter, I can explain it to you.
Yeah, sure.
Number one, so in terms of LGBTQ acceptance, right? Trans acceptance, queer acceptance, you find that to be, in the United States of America, in the wealthiest nation on earth, one of the most prosperous nations on the planet, to be to a certain degree, like a fancy thing to advocate for, right?
I don't think that you have to be rich to advocate for LGBT acceptance.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay, what are you saying? Sorry.
But let's also be clear. We're not talking about like fancy gay rights, like gay marriage and, like, oh, we're going to put it on the same, like, I know it's weird to call that fancy gay rights, but if we're going to call it that, then we can call that fancy gay rights. We're talking about basic survival. We're talking about the state in Gaza, the Hamas state. Not like allowing it, but suppressing it culturally and calling it barbaric or whatever. We're talking about them. If they find out you're gay, you get executed. You get killed. That is the state going out of its way to eliminate you. So I don't know if we can call that like a fancy thing to advocate for. Because I know a bunch of people who don't even like LGBT like rights on the like, oh, I'm so on the like trans kids playing the sport or whatever. They don't really care about any of that. But that on its basic level horrifies them, and they would want that to stop because they know that is not the government's business to be going out and executing people because of who they love or what they do in the privacy of their own home. So I don't know if I'd call that fancy gay rights as much as respecting the humanity of your fellow brothers and sisters of people.
No. What I'm simply saying is that LGBTQ representation in video games is oftentimes considered to be something that is like unnecessary or something that is considered
you're talking
to
about
be
like in games?
In games, in facets of culture, in facets of media.
Yeah, sometimes it happens. It feels like it's inauthentic. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, wait, is there a positive example of LGBTQ representation?
What is that like eyebrow raise that Asmon just does randomly, kind of like that? I don't know. Is it a tick or something, or is it just like a? I don't know. I don't think it's a tick. I just notice he does it kind of not any particular thing. He just kind of happens randomly.
Presentation that you can think of in mainstream media in recent years?
Sure.
Just so I understand what the dynamic is there.
Did you play Final Fantasy 16?
I did not.
Oh my god. So they had a character in Final Fantasy 16. His name was Dion. And he was like the prince of an area. He was like the, like person who could like channel Bahamut, right? And he was gay, and it was part of the story. And they actually blocked sale for that game in some places in the Middle East because Square Enix didn't want to censor the game for that reason. And I respected them a lot for that.
But that was wait, they refused to block the game? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yeah, Square Enix did not do that.
And that was a good representation of like gay or trans.
Yeah, I think so. I really do.
Okay.
I think that whenever you create a character, that the character's personality, sometimes it feels like when characters are added into stories, especially if they have like an LGBT like lean to them, they can be turned into being like a one-dimensional like I guess identification of that person. And it's like they make like an overt effort to talk about that and discuss it. And I feel like in a lot of times it can come off as patronizing or talking down to the audience.
Okay.
It feels very inauthentic to me.
Okay. So
yeah.
there are instances where there's like gay representation, trans representation that's like ham-fisted and just simply added on as not a necessary vehicle for narrative development, but instead simply for identity points, right?
Sure.
To do diversity. Okay. So not to get too lost in the sauce, we can get back to this part of the conversation in a second. But my point was that like that level of LGBTQ representation, it's for diversity. It's for marketing purposes. Usually it's just like sometimes it could be shitty.
By the way, if you want to stop listening to either of these people, you can always donate, ask me a question, and we can shift away from it at any point. Okay. You can ease the pain, not by clicking off the stream. Don't do that, of course, but by donating.
Narrative, shitty narrative devices, but ultimately it doesn't really matter. But a lot of people still get mad at it, right? A lot of people in the Western world still get mad at it. And for me in particular, there is a hierarchy of needs for and that all human beings respond to, all human beings exist under.
Is this like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or is this like something else?
Maslow's hierarchy of needs is appropriate, but like there's a higher standard, because the Maslow's hierarchy of needs usually is under the confines of like at least a developed country, where a developed country that is not constantly being bombarded or victims of like colonial occupation. My point is that Palestinians are not.
Why do we even need to go through this? Is like the weaker argument. Why not start with, if the Palestinians are blown up, so will the gay Palestinian. Like, you can't advocate on their behalf if they can't even exist as a people. And the gay Palestinians, like, not all of them are super excited about the idea of being occupied by Israel. You know, they don't want to be there, and they're still Palestinian. They'll still be treated in a certain way because they're Palestinian, and they'll be treated negatively because they're Israeli. They won't be able to go into the I don't even want to get into it. You just got the double layers
Just
there.
watched most of the Destiny versus Schroyer from InfoWars debate today. Very one-sided. Destiny was informed lol. Check it out.
I wasn't gonna watch it until I saw some clips on Twitter because I'm kind of, you know, I don't want to react to too much Destiny content. I want to exist as like an asteroid that goes by the Destiny orbit more than like re-entering it in its entirety. Okay. I do want to check out that video though, because that debate was very one-sided from what I saw, but I can't know that for sure until I watch it all, and I don't want to get just destroyed by all the Destiny clip chips on Twitter, as in, you know, all the Destiny Twitter fan accounts that clip those things, put them out there.
Inherently anti-gay or anti-trans or anything like that. There are gay Palestinians, there are trans Palestinians, both living in Gaza, in historic Palestine, and also certainly outside of Gaza.
Well, is it against the law?
The problem is there is no time or space or opportunity for them to engage in queer liberation. I'm
sorry. There is plenty of space for Hamas to say, we're not going to kill him anymore. And they could sell it in any millions of ways they want to. They could say, it's not worth the resources for us to do this. But of course, the activity will still be illegal. You will be fined and you will be told to, you know, you could just move it down from death. Like, oh, they don't have the time to get out of here. Get out of here. They could. Like, you could say that advocates advocating for like normalization of LGBT people, or like super advocating on them specifically, then okay, advocate it from a different way. Advocate it as advocation of, you know, certain crimes should not be the death penalty, and have it included in a wider group of crimes rather than you know, just gay activity specifically. But this is not a question of like, oh, you know, just like the upper echelons of the LGBT movement. This is basic rights, basic right to life. You cannot be gay and alive in Gaza unless you are in the closet, unless you hide it away. And if you get found out, your life can be forfeit.
Let alone, you know, advocate for more representation in their artworks, for example, when they're too busy being bombed and destroyed and killed and ethnically displaced for 76 years under an apartheid regime that is a settler colonial occupation.
Okay, real quick. You don't think that I support Israel, do you?
I don't, but I think
Okay,
that...
good.
No, I don't think you support Israel, but I think you saying that
don't.
like Palestinians are immoral or evil or have an evil, antiquated culture or are barbaric is not only ahistorical. What's up?
I do think that.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think you're wrong.
I don't know, man. Like, how can you be in support of a culture that tells people that they can't be who they want to be? Like, I mean, really, I mean, if I was advocating for what the laws were there, I would get banned for hate speech. How's that acceptable?
Yeah, I think you are misunderstanding what their culture is, what the Palestinian culture is, and you're also not setting the standard under the material conditions in which they exist.
I don't think that you can do that. So there are a number of other countries.
For example.
Okay, let me go after this.
Okay, you go ahead. But I will give you more historically appropriate points in a second.
So basically, the reason why I don't like what they do is because it's based off of a religious theocracy. And so you can look at other religious theocracies in other countries.
So it looks like his alt account got banned, not his main account. I'm looking at it now. I was just checking the specifics of his ban. Huh. Zachrar is his alt.
Aren't being bombed. And the one commonality that they have is that they all suppress people's identity and they express their freedom of expression. And I think that any culture and any type of government that is derivative of a religion is fundamentally inferior. I think this is true with any book. It's true with Judaism. It's true with Christianity. It's true with Islam. It's true with Hinduism. I think it's true with anything. And I find it to be very problematic that we're using these books as a guideline for like how to make laws when these books actively encourage killing people for different types of identities. And obviously, like, I understand that there's like a huge spectrum of people that are part of any culture. There's people that are way more progressive, people that are way less progressive. But what I see is that I see countries that have laws that haven't been bombed, right? You look at like Saudi Arabia or like Dubai. A lot of these other countries still have the same types of expressions or same type of restrictions on the expression for LGBT. And I find that to be problematic and inferior. And I think that you could I want to make sure that this is very clear, because like, I don't want you to think that this is something that's like oh, the brown people over there are wrong. I would say the exact same thing for us, you know, like the church, you know, like Christianity. Like if you look at, for example, like Salem witch trials, it's disgusting. It's horrible. So all I'm saying is that I think that there is a standard that's being applied, and I don't really understand how that's defensible at all. I don't like, and that's what doesn't make sense to me. Is
It's
that
not.
and like okay,
It's
well go
not.
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
But here's the problem.
Okay.
It's not defensible, but I think most people, including like the gay Palestinians or queer Palestinians or queer Lebanese people, understand that there is no room for advocating for civil liberties in your own domestic policies when you are escaping bombing campaigns.
So, I see your point.
So
but do you see my
the
point
reason this is the reason why so many of these countries, whether it be Iran, whether it be Afghanistan, whether it be Egypt, or many of these places that were far more liberal from.
I will say this as a treat for everybody who stayed. The internet crashes here has completely destroyed what was left of my good faith for the rest of this conversation. So I'm just going to be blunt. Plus, I want to go to sleep. That dog is napping. That lucky little... Oof.
Western standards, from the Western understanding of like social liberalism.
That dog. Hasan's right.
Multiple decades ago, before Western intervention, are no longer as socially liberal as they once were, because
you're talking about like the 1917 Iran thing, basically.
Not 1917, but yes, circa 1959.
1970.
Yes, sorry.
Oh boy. Whatever, man. Whatever. I don't think either of them, if we started doing the quiz dates on the historical of, I don't know. I would say Hasan probably knows more about the region than Asmongold. I don't know about how much more, but I would say probably.
And when you look at the history of these countries, and not to say that like,
but like sometimes like I don't know
think,
how he's informed though. This is the problem. Is I feel like sometimes having no knowledge is better than having some knowledge if your knowledge is stored in a certain way. Like so I just don't know like where he gets his knowledge from.
That Saudi Arabia,
like for example, like leftists were brain dead, and it even spilled over to me when I was younger, like brain dead on Syria.
Deserves to be annihilated for having a religious.
Not all of them, mind you. They were really good leftists on the Syrian civil war and on like anti-Assadists, but that civil war brought out some wild like pro-authoritarian nonsense.
Theocracy. I don't personally think Israel deserves to be annihilated for operating within like liberal confines, but still maintaining a religious theocracy that is baked into now their constitution.
Do you think that I support that?
No, I don't think you support that either. Okay. But, oh, wait. Well, in terms of the Palestinians, I think the quote was that inferior cultures deserve to be wiped out.
Oh, I don't know about that. I feel like anytime you're killing people based off of anything like that, I don't think that Israel or America or anybody has the right to come in and tell Palestine how to live and for them, like what they're supposed to do. right? I'm not trying to tell them what to do, but if you want me to accept their culture as being equivalent to ours, I won't do that.
Okay.
And I do think that it's worse.
Okay, but culture, you understand that culture changes throughout time, and it is directly a consequence of like how people or what people are experiencing. In the United States of America,
we're evidence of that. We're evidence of that because like we're
Yes.
much farther along.
So
Yeah, I
so
think a
do
lot
you
of places
think
are
do
less
you think like I don't think you would agree that bombing places makes them more tolerant to
Absolutely not.
yeah. Okay. And I don't
Absolutely
think that
not.
I don't think that you think that like nuking America, for example, circa 2013 when gay marriage was
We're not going to bomb the gay into them. I understand that.
okay.
You're totally right.
Okay. So
Yeah.
in terms of some of your statements,
Yeah.
like not only I think you're wrong on the history of queer culture in Arab countries, in Muslim nations in general. I'll give you one example. The Ottoman Empire actually decriminalized homosexuality in the Tanzimat era. I think it was like 18th century.
Mm-hmm.
And before then, it was not even like a problem. It was never an issue. Far before.
What? What? Wait. What does he mean? It was never an issue. What?
I'm
sorry. I'm sorry. This is. Let him finish his statement because that would. No, I must be misunderstanding.
Tanzimat era. I think it was like 18th century.
Mm-hmm.
And before.
How can you say it wasn't an issue before that if it was criminal?
Then it was not even like a problem. It was never an issue. Far before Western nations ever actually decriminalized or made it.
Why do we have to go back to the Ottoman Empire to talk about pro-LGBT representation in the Middle East? Is it that bad? You have to go like 200 years in the past?
Legal to be gay. And this is oftentimes a not really mentioned aspect of the Muslim world or Muslim culture or the Arab history.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, this is the problem. The Quran says being gay is bad, and it says that if you practice that the person should be put to, So the culture is built around that faith and look to that faith as a guidance for their lives, are going to take that guidance, look at that instruction, and they're going to say, oh, okay, then it's being bad. And then you add that with the personal revulsion that people could feel by seeing the type of love that they don't have, that they can't relate to, which, by the way, gays could feel that in contrary too. That adds to creating like an homophobic culture. I mean, like, I'm sorry, like religions that say that you should kill LGBT people are homophobic. Is that like the... It's not because like Arabs are like genetically or no, it's because they follow a faith that is homophobic. Just like if you go to countries that are very, very, very Christian, there's going to be higher levels of homophobia because Christianity also has homophobia within its text. Maybe not as much in the New Testament, but most Christians also believe the Old Testament has some relevance.
Or the region's history at all. Most people don't know this, and it's like genuinely shocking to them. You might maybe even be shocked to find out that
when you go to many different African countries that have like the most like horrible like anti-LGBT laws that are getting passed, like how much of that do you think was partially pushed by the religiosity that the public has adopted either from missionaries or otherwise? Like I think it was a contributing factor, and the Middle East is pretty religious.
The Ottoman Empire, where Palestine was seen as a safe haven for Jews as they were escaping the Spanish Inquisition, for example, and many other pogroms that Jewish people experienced especially in Western and Eastern Europe. The Ottoman Empire in the MENA region, all the way that spans to Morocco, was seen as a safe haven and safe harbor for Jews, where they were allowed to coexist in far better conditions under Islamic rule, technically. That was far more tolerant.
I would go even farther than you are. I think that back then it wasn't just the fact that they were accepting of gay. I think that they were way more scientifically oriented. They were way more focused on learning and mathematics. I think that's evidently true. I don't think anybody would say the Ottoman Empire was shitty or anything like that. I think they were very progressive
Whatever.
for their time. It's not even a
I mean, it depends what you mean by shitty. Like, and to who? You know, to who?
question.
So
I totally agree with you.
But things have changed in the region since then.
They sure have.
So what do you think is the difference there? Like, what do you think has happened in the hundreds of years that have passed, that have gone by, or especially in the last 100 years? Why has the attitude overall in terms of governance changed so dynamically and so dramatically?
I think there's probably a bunch of different reasons for it, right? I mean, it's not like one reason, but I don't think that are we trying to imply that it's like American imperialism and interventionism that's caused this to happen? Is that kind of like where you're going with
no,
this?
I am saying that.
Dog, no, dude. Come on, it's all our fault. Like, okay, when you talk about certain parts of Africa, there is an argument about the American missionaries that have, and I'm not going to say it's completely that, even that is delusional to some extent, but that, you know, there's a contributing factor. You can like look at the direct relate, whatever. But we're going to say that in the region where in its foundational religious text, it says the gays, and we're like, well, actually, there's American imperialism that did that. Because the Marxist, I guess his Marxist perspective on it is America has done interventions, and the interventions destabilized countries like Iraq, which was already economically not doing the best, by the way. When you do like crazy wars to conquer Kuwait and conquer Iran, and then you mess them all up, waste a bunch of money, waste a bunch of lives, and then get sanctions placed on you for your own, you know, starting nuclear programs, wasting all this, you know. And I wouldn't say the, you know, Saddam family is particularly the best economic masterminds, but then we invade, it causes a bunch of destruction. You know, there's a rebellion period. The economy is definitely not the best. That right there did not provide the foundations for homophobia. The foundations for homophobia, if anywhere, is going to be in things like foundational religious texts. Okay? America did not come there and place homophobia there. You could say that as economies and societies and develop and become wealthier, it becomes easier to maybe educate yourselves away from just like strict religious doctrine, and you can maybe broaden your worldview to say like, well, you know, I think that, you know, maybe not every single part of this needs to be adhered to 100% in the wild, wild world. And, you know, the wisdom that Allah or God, whoever has given me, allows me to reflect on my neighbors and see that they're living their life, I'm living my own, and there's no need for me to, like, they could do that, and that could happen. But the idea that if we, number one, that if we didn't intervene, that the Middle East would be like a peaceful and stable place, that right there is an assumption. But number two, that doesn't deal with like the foundational religious texts, which I think was also like, while I don't agree with I think what Asmon said was gross. While I don't agree with the statement, I think a lot of it was derived from like a disgust towards like something that comes from like hardcore religiosity. And like being more secular generally, in my view, is better. But there's not a lot of, I mean, even in the places where they say it's there's like secularism, like the best you can hope for is LGBT people not being killed usually. Like that's the best you can hope for.
Yeah.
America not only directly armed and radicalized fundamentalists in the region, including but not limited to Afghanistan, for example, with the Mujahideen, because they were seen as like a fighting force that they could use against the communist adjacent Afghan government or the USSR inevitably when the USSR did invade. But also beyond that, the most nationalistic or the most militant fundamentalists were perceived in Iran, for example, as the true liberators that were not that were willing to fight against the Western-backed Shah regime, the Western-backed monarchy in Iran. So that's the reason why a lot of people, whether they agreed with it or not, ultimately on the social front doesn't really matter. They were like, these guys are going to protect us. These guys are actually fighting back against this ruthless rule of the Shah that was, you know, falsely torturing people on a regular basis.
Okay, so
that's
if your
how
argument is that, well, how do you reconcile that with the fact that there are other countries?
Wait, okay,
like
I'm
Saudi
sorry.
Arabia?
For example, like when we talk about Iran, right? Before the revolution, while there were still like problems with like LGBT issues, I don't believe that before the revolution that LGBT people were killed for being LGBT. In fact, I believe like there was even like, if I remember correctly, no, I don't want to speculate. But you can go Google this, but it was after the Islamic Revolution that they reintroduced like public executions for homosexuals. Now, is that America's fault? The anti-American, if we didn't have more interventionism, maybe then they wouldn't have associated gays with the. You can make that art, but if we're now saying like all the forces that America are opposing are the ones that actually are the fault of America, I don't know how far you can really stretch this. Like there was existent homophobia in the space. Poverty makes it maybe so that homophobia is more embedded, but I mean, you can only pin so much of this on America. Do you really think if we take America out of the picture, it's going to become like a gay paradise? It wouldn't. There's other problems there too. I mean, like, and we're not the only causers of poverty. We're also not the only ones intervening. You don't think the IRGC wouldn't have been as repressive and violent to the Syrian people as they were in our timeline if America wasn't there?
For example, that don't have that history, but still have the same laws.
Oh, that's a great example. Saudi Arabia is allowed to exist like that because they have a valuable resource that they are gladly and willingly coordinating with the Western powers on, in terms of OPEC plus. They have oil.
Doesn't that?
So did Iran, but Iranian oil was refined by British Petroleum. Mossadegh at the time, it was a social democrat. Very progressive for the time as well, wanted to nationalize their own extraction industries. And this was seen as a massive slight and it caused massive harm to the profit margins of British Petroleum and the American intelligence and Western intelligence cooperated to overthrow Mossadegh very openly and very clearly. They implemented the Shah regime. He was brutal. He was a brutal autocrat. He was a monarch. People hated him. And at the end of the day, it was the Islamic Revolution and the fundamentalist forces that were the most successful in terms of fighting back against the Shah. That's the reason why they overtook the country and have been dominating the nation.
I don't know. I feel like you should be giving more credit. I can't believe I'm the one saying this, to the labor movement and the other parts of the revolution. Just because like the Islamic Revolution won out doesn't mean they were the ones that were the most effective. It was a broad scale coalition that overthrew the Shah. It was just the Islamic Revolution that edged out the power struggle.
Ever since, there are plenty of gay and trans people. By the way, Iran is actually weirdly very pro-trans, but I'm sure that you probably didn't know that. They're very homophobic, but they are.
By the way, if the policy is if you're gay, transition, it'll be better for you. That's like pitching that brutal repressive policy where they have to come off and chop off my thing when I don't want that. It's going to make me feel dysphoria for the rest of my life. I don't want that. No one wants that. Selling that as a selling point is not. I hate when I hear this. I hate when I hear this from like, oh, they're strangely pro-trans, and that's the only context you give, as if like Iran is like a trans ally. Let's connect this to what the policy is, though. If you are a homosexual, what do people do? What does the government offer? What happens?
They are very pro-trans. A lot of cultures are actually very pro-trans, way more than the United States of America. Maybe to a fault at times, like Iran, when they do forcible gender.
I mean, you look at like Native American culture. I think it's extremely popular. Norse culture. I mean, you could say the same thing about Loki, right? It's like the idea of being trans is like super, super, super old. Like Shiva, right? Another good example. So I think that's true.
And what about like trans people who don't want surgeries? Like what? Because the government would view, let's for example, like a trans woman having sex with a man, they would see that as homosexuality unless they went through with the surgery. Therefore, they're being forced into these decisions that they shouldn't be forced into.
There's a concept of third gender in India, Pakistan, and many other places as well. So but that's besides the point. So what I'm trying to say is, we cannot exist outside of the material condition that we are subjected to. If you are living under a ruthless, corrupt autocratic rule, and there's a group of people that say, I'm going to, fight back against this ruthless autocratic rule that is like Western power backed, then people will be on board with that. They're going to be like, oh, this is great. I love this revolution. I'm on board.
Okay, so I can go even farther than that. I totally understand why groups like ISIS happen. Like, if you look at people from ISIS, these are people that are like 20 years old. They've lived their entire life being occupied by a foreign power. I think that we're...
What? No, I'm sorry. Look, okay, no. You don't even... People from ISIS came... A lot of them were just like hardcore, like jihadists from all across the region, which means countries that were occupied and were not occupied, okay? That's the first thing. Second thing, a lot of them are like weird foreigners, freakish foreigners, who are a lot of the time more extreme than the locals. People were press ganged into it. A lot of them were criminals that broke out of prison with the religious extremists, because ISIS did a lot of prison breaks. I mean, sure, some of them, it was like, we don't like occupation as well, but I mean, like, that's like one faction, I guess.
There's a difference between ISIS and Iran, though. Like, I hope you understand that, right? And just like there's a difference between ISIS and Hamas and all these other like
I'm just giving you an example. I'm giving you an example of like, so I think extremist groups are created. So you got a lot of heat, you got a lot of hate. One of your most popular, biggest hits was that America deserved 9/11. Remember that?
Yes.
Bad day, bad day. But what you meant to say is that American interventionism inadvertently caused this to happen. Am I
directly,
right?
not even inadvertently. Is a concept that historians call blowback.
I totally agree with you about that. I completely agree with you. I think that you're right. I defended that. Yeah. So my perspective is that I don't think that we can blame, like, I don't...
By the way, he shouldn't have said it was stupid, and it was bad to say, and saying something crazy hyperbolic, and then like walking it back to be like, well, what I meant was, but they got the blowback from... And by the way, this also presumes that if we were not doing those types, like the specific... Also, no military intervention in the Middle East or some military intervention. Should we have, for example, if we intervened in Kuwait, would that have been enough? Like, what level of military intervention are we saying no? Like, if America was completely out of the region, then nothing would have happened. Well, okay, I guess. But then you're also saying America should not be involved in the Middle East, no matter what local governments want or what local deals that could be made because of the whims of a terror organization. If we're talking about the invasion of Iraq or Afghanistan, I mean, it can't be an invasion of Iraq or Afghanistan. Like, maybe he's talking about like support for Israel or support for, I guess it'd have to boil it down further. I'd have to go check his explanation from like years ago when this was a scandal. But I mean, it depends, like what pullback would we do? And would that necessarily have stopped the other reasons that he gave for wanting to do the attack? But I mean, it's possible that it contributed to it. That's something you could say, certainly.
See the logic that all of these other countries that are like, you know, from the West, right, that are like much more progressive, are somehow intervening and making this, like, these other countries in the Middle East hate gay people and like want to kill gay people. And I don't see how, like... Wait,
you don't agree with that? You're saying...
No, I don't. I don't really see how they're congruent.
So I don't... Why do you think that... So why do you think that historically they didn't hate gay people, but now they do? Like, don't you...
I'm not sure.
You recognize that, like, culture changes. You said they...
What is he talking about? What the... Even in the Ottoman Empire, it was not like loved. What are you talking about? They used to be lovely with the gay. They used to be super chill with, no, they were not. No, they were not. What is he talking about? What is this nonsense? What is he talking about? What, dude? I'm sorry. Like, are we going to say, like, let's say tomorrow Texas institutes a law to kill all the LGBT people. It's awful. It's terrible. Would we say that today that Texas or like Mississippi or like well, they used to love LGBT people? And well, not necessarily. No, it was still bad now. It's just worse later. It's like, and why is that? Oh, well, religion is a big, and he can point to the fact there's still like a leftist or Marxist explanation he could throw out there for this, but don't pretend that they were like always like pro-gay, and then all of a sudden the West attacked, and then they all were like, we must hate the gays now. Like, this is silly. This feels silly.
That you understand that like the Ottoman Empire was more progressive in comparison to its European counterparts in terms of like
which European counterparts? It depends on which European counterparts you're talking about.
The way that they view gay people, even or homosexuality in general.
I think that
we can't say that about the Dutch. I don't think you can say that about the Danish either.
We can come to the agreement, and like we can talk about historically all you want, right? I think that in some cases, like, that's true. In a lot of cases, like the way that this is perceived around the world, like Romans looked at it differently, Greeks looked at it differently, everybody's looked at it differently. But I'm talking about what's happening today. And if I'm looking at those cultures today, those are cultures that are oppressing people based off of their identity. And at a certain point,
right now, the Palestinians don't have any structural governance to be able to do that regardless. So there is no like gay oppression happening in Gaza, because the only oppression that's happening in Gaza is that Israel's lighting them on fire with regular frequency.
And we're paying for it.
What does he mean? Of course, there's a gay oppression in Gaza. Gays get executed by the religious authority. What does he mean? Like right now, like that's probably a very tiny to non-existent like aspect of probably everyday life in Gaza, because the war is all encompassing. But if right now it was found out that this guy was gay in like some command or whatever, that would still be a massive scandal. That could still lead to them not only losing their job, but losing their life. I mean, it's like that's still that state of affairs still exists even during wartime. Like, even if it doesn't take a primary focus, I don't know, like that existence is still there, but it's just that the war is obviously the bigger killer. It's the bigger bringer of destruction. It's the bigger main focus of all Palestinians, and I think it deserves the attention. But that doesn't mean that other state of affairs has changed to some extent.
Yes. So, in terms of like Islamist fundamentalism, right?
Yeah.
In terms of Islamist fundamentalism, or the way that they the way that like you perceive Palestinians as viewing gay people.
Yeah.
There has never been an opportunity for Palestinian people to engage in queer liberation, because in the hierarchy of needs, the number one need for them is to stop Israel from killing them, is to stop Israel from dominating them. Since 1948, and even before then as well. But after Israel was formed in 1948, that has been the game for the most part. They have never had an opportunity to even think about queer liberation. If your house is on fire, you're not going to be spending a whole lot of time thinking about the color of your curtains, right? And that's what this is. There's a much larger problem at hand. And this is precisely the reason why a lot of people, actually, never fully comprehend this. But a lot of leftists in the Western world do understand that intersectionality. And regardless of like the perceived queer phobia from Palestinians and Palestinian governance, they still, of course, offer solidarity. I said this earlier, and I think it's a take bear repeating. I'm in favor of Medicare for all and universal social safety nets in the United States of America unconditionally. I do not believe in refusing to offer, for example, any sort of health care to a person because they're a Nazi even, right? That's an extreme case. I think that they deserve health care.
I agree with you, and I would even go farther than that. I think that if somebody's an illegal immigrant, I don't think that we should ever I think it's disgusting to tell a doctor or tell a healthcare provider to let somebody die or to let them bleed out or something like that just because of that. I completely agree with you. I had to pay my taxes recently. I'm sure you're probably about in the same place. It was 7 figures. And so I have no problem with that.
I live in California. It's pretty significant.
You got a bad, it's
but I don't care.
Good.
I don't mind that.
I don't either. I used to be paying for people used to pay for my food stamps. Now I'm paying for somebody else's. And if they raise my taxes to pay for Medicare for all, I would be happy and I would vote for that.
So if you
I would be
understand
very
that,
much in
right?
support of that,
So
for sure.
so you recognize
Okay.
that.
Kind of off topic a little
Would you
bit.
say that like a religious enclave
I see where Hasan's going with this,
in
but
Alabama, for example,
it's so much simpler to say, like, you know, Palestine, if the gay Palestinian can't be liberated, the Palestinians are dead. I think that's the easiest, simplest argument. I don't know why I need to go like through the hierarchy of needs. I already said this earlier, but
deserves to be
I
wiped
feel like we're gonna do a lot of circling.
out for their understanding of like gay people, like a white religious enclave in Alabama.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I don't think that they deserve to be wiped out, but I would not advocate for them. I would not look at that group and say, this is a group of people that I support.
So you can
I would
understand where the
not
confusion
support
comes
people like
from when you
And I can
said that
see
about
that. That's why
Palestinians,
I
right?
wanted to. Yeah, sure, right, sure, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about it, right? Because I think that you and we had a conversation about this before, and I can very much easily empathize with Palestinians. Of course I can, but I don't think that it's entirely true that Palestine, like, I mean, didn't Palestine support Hitler?
no,
Pretty sure they did.
no.
The America-
The Grand Mufti did. The Grand Mufti, and then he recruited like soldiers for the SS.
What you're talking about is the British colonial British colonial occupation put forward a leader. Oftentimes in colonies, when you engage in
But like wait. Let's not take away any like local support the Grand Mufti. We can't just be like, oh, the Grand Mufti was a British plant, and the British, for whatever reason, decided that they were going to choose a Grand Mufti that is supporting the party that would go to war with the like. It was also local support, and he recruited it didn't come from nowhere.
like colonial actions, like and British Mandate Palestine was obviously a colony of the English. They will appoint a person into a position of power that is more.
There were people across the Middle East or others that were in colonies of a nationalist variety, sometimes of an ultra-nationalist variety, who saw the Nazis as a tool for anti-British or anti-French colonial oppression. There were those in Ireland who thought that maybe this could be a route for fighting and getting their territory back in Northern Ireland. Of course, they were not the majority, but I mean, those people existed in the Middle East as well. I mean, you can understand the logic. You can disagree with the logic, of course, now knowing what the Nazis were back, like, post facto. But, I mean, there was some who believed that. And the Grand Mufti was someone who believed that to some extent, but also was, you know, very, just to be blunt, anti-Semitic.
More acceptable to British needs and desires in the region to dominate the people. This is, I mean, history is riddled with examples such as this one. The Palestinian Grand Mufti was a singular person who went and linked up with Adolf Hitler and you know, thought that he could coordinate with Adolf Hitler in terms of like ridding Palestine of the Jews. Having said that, however, 11,000
and that sounds pretty bad.
That sounds pretty bad.
But when you realize that, one, there were also Jewish militias, early Zionist militias that also sought out Adolf Hitler's help and tried.
Okay, he's talking about the Lahai, and I just don't think that comparison is fair. While there is some reverence for the Lahai in certain circles, there's even like a medal or whatever that was awarded, and I think it's gross. They were a Jewish militia that wanted to work with the Nazis to deport all the Jews to Israel so they would survive, and like there's justifications that they make for it, but I think they're all terrible because like it's basically saying we'll help you fight the British if you help bring the Jews here, and that means they'll just help the genocide of other people to save their, like, I don't agree with it at all. I think it's gross. But that is one militia movement, not the Grand Mufti. It's a little different when we talk about influence or like general power. It's a little different. Like it's bad, but it's a little different.
To coordinate with Adolf Hitler, you understand that this has no bearing on an entire people and what their actual attitudes were. Not,
of course, yeah, it doesn't have a bearing on the entire people, but we're also, let's not pretend these are the same thing.
Not only that, but also 11,000 Palestinians actually fought alongside the Allied forces against Adolf Hitler. So Palestinians, by far greater numbers, actually fought against Adolf Hitler than the one British occupation guy that actually linked up with Adolf Hitler. It's actually a common historic Holocaust revisionist talking point that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu once famously utilized as well, where he falsely claimed that Adolf Hitler did not want to kill the Jews until he talked to the Palestinian Grand Mufti, who gave him the idea of killing the Jews and doing the final solution. This was such a
like the Grand Mufti, like wasn't he a leader in some of like the anti-Zionist and anti-Jewish riots in Palestine? Like it's like if it's not like this guy just got picked out of nowhere and he wasn't like working and like built himself up. It's he made it sound like as if the Grand Mufti was picked out of nowhere, placed in, and he was just like, I don't like the Jews now. And then the British were like, oh no, oh my God. And he like built no support up locally. But no, the dude was like he was a believer in like Sharia. He was a believer in, you know, in the cause against Zionism. He was he built up from the riots. He built up from that movement until eventually he became the Grand Mufti.
Gross historical revisionist talking point that obviously the entirety of Israeli society actually criticized Benjamin Netanyahu for saying such a ridiculous...
But he did want to get rid of the Jews, though, right?
Yeah, but it's a singular person that has no bearing on real Palestinian existence, especially when much larger numbers of Palestinians fought alongside the Allied forces, right?
I think that it definitely does matter if a figurehead of a country is supporting Hitler.
It's not a figurehead of a country, though. It's the figurehead of...
Also, after... I just Googled some stuff just to double check some stuff. After the Grand Mufti was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, he became president of a semi like de facto Palestinian like clientele state, whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't need to get into. Point is, the Grand Mufti had a little bit more influence and a little bit more support than I think he's letting on than just so he was just picked by the British. I mean, he like revolted against British rule, right? I mean, like he was part of a leader that revolted. So it's like, it's not all the British's fault if he was revolting against the Brit. I mean, how do you revolt against the British if you don't have support outside of the British?
It's an appointed person
and
that has no bearing.
And
for example,
don't you feel like it's a bit unfair for you to attribute every instance of bigotry and bad behavior to being the West's fault?
No, I think I have a very realistic and materialist analysis of these
Okay, yeah. Somehow the whatever. I don't need to
sorts of things.
You've already heard what I had to say.
Where I think that people don't have time to fight for gay liberation.
I mean, it's true. Like all of his conclusions just comes back. Well, the homophobia in the Middle East is the West's fault. You know, Russia invading Ukraine is kind of the West's fault too. Also, like the Grand Mufti, you know, it was all just the British plant. You know, it was really the British's fault for the Grand Mufti. It's also the West's fault. It's like, it just kind of always just come around to that, doesn't it? And it's not that, you know, none of his critiques are true. Like when you talk about like the state of Yemen, or you could talk about like American interventions in South America, and you can find real stuff where you can, but every single issue just comes back to that. Every single issue. There's no, I mean, when you even get to the point where homophobia is the entire, like, it's kind of the West's fault really too, even though like the religion that was broadcasted and spread throughout the Middle East, that wasn't created by us. That was around way before America or any of these Western countries or the modern conception of countries were founded. Some of these things are bigger than just the West or America or any individual country, collection of countries or foreign policies you don't like right now. Some things are multi-generational that are passed down.
And like I said, they're too busy trying to literally rebuild their homes after it's bombed, especially by a force that, you know, doesn't have like automatic heat-seeking missiles that avoid gay people. You know what I mean? They're killing gay people and trans people in Gaza every fucking day. Like there is no, like gay liberation is not a real conversation here. It's just a mere talking point that a lot of people who defend Israel, not saying you do, but a lot of people who defend Israel try to repackage Israel's violence and contextualize it and make it seem more appropriate to an American audience that is sometimes pro-gay and pro-queer. It rarely ever works. A lot of queer people still don't give a shit. They're like, I don't care. Just stop killing these people. Is their attitude. So that's it. That's the reality of the matter, is that once Palestine is liberated, then they can have this conversation internally. But right now, Western forces are allowing the death and destruction of this people to continue.
What do you think the odds are that after this stops happening, that the Palestinians are going to get together and say that it's okay to be gay?
I don't know, because I can't even imagine a world where this death and destruction isn't constant. But I would say that just like in the United States of America, you know, people inevitably evolved, inevitably fought back, and
what do you think? I've actually got a really good question.
An environment for queer liberation, even though to this day there are still a shit ton of problems that especially trans people experience on a regular basis.
Oh, I mean, it to me, I'm sure you're on Twitter probably more than I am.
I'm not.
And so, really?
Yeah, I deleted it off my phone. I rarely go on it unless I'm live.
Nick did the same thing. That's crazy. Wow. Okay. Well, okay. I'm on Twitter a lot. How much more racist do you think that it's gotten, and like homophobic do you think it's gotten in the last like 2 years? I think it's like 500x, right?
Yes.
Like it's insane. It's crazy. And I think that it's just it just keeps getting worse too. And I'm curious, like, kind of what your viewpoint is, because we're talking about like kind of how like these different cultures are accepting people, and like now, what do you think about like Saudi Arabia and like the way that they're, like, I guess effectively sports washing things? I think that's the term that's being used a lot, right, with like esports, etc. Like, what's your take on that?
I think that Saudi Arabia is also a religious theocracy that is simply trying to moderate their viewpoint in an effort to become more accepted by Western culture and bring in Western capital into the country. Ultimately, if they did become a queer safe haven, for example, overnight, there's still plenty of issues in Saudi society in terms of utilizing slave labor, in terms of death and destruction that befalls like indigenous populations in areas where they want to do building projects, and beyond that, there is the whole genocide in Yemen. A lot of these things can be solved inevitably, and there were some initiative from China that brought Iran and Saudi Arabia to the table to stop the destruction of Yemen, for example. That was relatively successful pre-October 7. But like, there are a shit ton of problems in Saudi Arabia still. Having said that,
recently they just let women drive.
Yes,
very recently. Yeah,
yes.
no,
a lot of the things,
I'm fully aware of
the things that people who use this kind of sentiment against Palestinians oftentimes will overlook Saudi Arabia or other Gulf states that have the exact. Okay, so this was the thing. If Asmongold was, I don't know, maybe a little sharper on this, something that he could say here would be like, okay, but if you're saying this culture is regressed, then that this culture has not had the ability to progress itself. Number one, he should just talk about the faith. I think that's something maybe he should bring up, that it's not just the West, but that if it hasn't had a chance to progress due to any number of factors, then you would say that it is therefore like inferior in this one way. The problem with Asmongold is his position is indefensible. But if he was able to narrow it down to saying we are progressed better than them on this, and it isn't completely caused just by foreign factors, there are other factors like religiosity and religion that can be dealt with in the long run. Stuff can be reformed, mentalities can be reformed. But if the position is, if you just narrowed it down some, maybe he could find a position in this conversation that is semi-defensible. Then he would just argue with us on whether or not like that homophobia is completely created by the West. But his position is like, it's indefensible. So there's no way that he can win here or even begin to win here. But if he wanted to try to dig himself a new foxhole, he could try. Same rules and restrictions. But once again, This is more so about allowing right-wing sentiment to fester.
Because you could just be like, look at Saudi Arabia. Like, look at their per capita GDP. Homosexuality is still outlawed. It's still outlawed. Or do we think that's just going to happen? Like, it's just going to get gay marriage through, like, no work? It's just going to progress naturally as they get wealthier? Or is it, like, how is that going to work? I would like to see them, like, beat out the specifics of exactly how much of this is just a lack of development versus other cultural factors, like, religion.
And dominate a society. There are plenty of members in the Israeli Knesset, for example, that also don't want women to learn how to fucking read and write.
It's so bad. Like, I absolutely, you're completely right.
And there are plenty of people in America who feel similar ways as well.
I've been hearing a lot of bad things about women being able to vote.
Yes, some of those people gain more prominence in society as society becomes. Some of these people end up gaining more prominence in society, and slowly but surely they try to reorient society to their own desires. That's the reason why a lot of people fight back against this sort of thing. Okay, that's the reason why a lot of people fight back. Gay people, queer people, people who are aligned with them fight back against this sort of sentiment in an effort to make sure that it never turns into a society that does this kind of thing to gay people, queer people in general. So
does it again? Well, we used to do it for a long time. I mean, gay marriage being legal is very, very recent.
Yes. And it's already...
I totally support that.
Yeah. So my point is...
Yeah.
We've never given the opportunity to many of these countries in the MENA region to be able to have the freedom to continue developing and have their own civil liberties and have their own fight for civil liberties. And we will never be able to see what it would look like if they were given the opportunity without our intervention. We can only look to the past where that intervention wasn't as severe.
I'm sorry, but like just pretending that like if we took American intervention out, number one, the Middle East would be like a sovereign, prosperous region. This is all like based on that assumption. It's based on an alternative history that we did not walk down. And like maybe we move out and the Soviets move in. And guess what? The Soviets were intervening in the Middle East in different ways. Guess what? That invasion that the British did of Iran over like the nationalization of oil, you want to know who else was involved in that invasion? When they had those disagreements with the Iranians, the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was involved in the invasion. Like, do you think like that anti-communist position of some Iranians didn't come from somewhere? Look, point is, like, I don't think that he can just assume that if America didn't intervene in the region, that it'd be a prosperous place. They could say that certain interventions brought down the standard of living in the countries that it happened. And then the sprawling terrorism affected other countries as it provided power vacuums. But like Saddam could have fallen 10, 20, or 15 years later due to a bunch of structural problems that they already had in the country. Maybe the revolution would have been more positive and it could have taken the country in a better way. Or maybe it still would have gone into a brutal like war zone, and instead it would be an Iraqi civil war between the different factions as the Sunnis that were in control try to hold on to power, and then the Shia Iranian-backed militias try to gravitate back and take power, and then the other powers like Saudi Arabia and others funnel guns in to support the other militias because they're terrified of Iranian expansion and the revolution against their monarchies being spread. And oh god, like we have no clue, we have no idea.
And point to a time when they were relatively open-minded, especially in comparison to their European counterparts. But the way that we see what they do, okay, is never translated to the way that we operate here in the United States of America.
How do you figure that
dynamic? I think that dynamic stems from dehumanization of Arab people in general. That is unfortunately all too commonplace in Western media and in Western society.
I think it happens a lot. I mean, like, and obviously, like after 9/11, I mean, have a number of Arab friends, and they've told me it was a very, very bad time. So I think that you're absolutely right about that, and it is problematic. I don't really think that it's fair to say that, like, of course, like all people that are Arabs, and also like really it's not about being an Arab. It's about having a religious
Burns is
theocracy that
immoral,
enables you to
morally
dehumanize.
corrupt,
Hey,
man.
abandoned. Thank you so much for the primer and being sub for 3 months, buddy. Appreciate that.
Other people.
Yeah,
'Cause you wanna talk
Palestinians
about
don't have a theocracy,
dehumanization.
by the way, just so you understand. Like they don't have anything. They don't have any sort of like real valid form of governance at all. They have never been allowed to have.
I mean, like, what do we call what isn't? I mean, you could say they don't have a certain like nation state, but it doesn't mean there's no government. Like Hezbollah has the government in southern Lebanon. It's not a country, but they've got their own they've got their own hospitals. They've got their own like tax system. They have like a clientelist state in the south of Lebanon. Like that's a state. Like I mean, I'm not a state. It's the government. I'm sorry, yeah, my words messed up. But the point is, it's a form of government. They had a form of government in Gaza. They have a form of government in the West Bank. The one in the West Bank participates and cooperates with Israel more. Definitely, its police force. But it's still a government. It's still something. It still has a form of ideology. It still has values that live by its enforcement. I mean, of course, they've never had the ability to have a country in order to build the foundations of sovereignty that could allow them to, like I understand what he's trying to get at, but they have a government, and the governments have ideologies that they govern by.
A real valid form of governance or any sort of autonomy or any sort of sovereignty, at least, especially since
Do they have a Muslim HOA? Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Chad.
1948.
Sure, but like in all of the other places in the same area, pretty much all of them that are doing their own governance come to the same conclusion about gay people.
Yeah.
They pretty much,
So-
yeah, they do.
So so this is really interesting that you're saying this because
Yeah.
you recognize that like a lot of those other Gulf states are in alignment with the United States of America and are allowed to operate in whichever ways they see fit, including but not limited to helping Israel, right? They get F-16s and fleets of American planes, and they get security contracts for their consistent maintenance of American interests in the region.
Do you think I support that?
I don't. I'm
don't.
not even
don't.
saying if you support it or
so-
not. I'm
so
simply
here's the
stating that
thing.
like
ahead.
monopolizing an entire region of people and assuming that they all are operating on the same boundaries is incorrect. It would be
I mean, look, it is true that saying that all the people in the Middle East treat gays the same. That's not true. There's not really a country in the Middle East that treats them well. But, I mean, definitely relative to the standards of, Europe or the United States. But, I mean, it is true that different countries treat them differently. Like, some places just criminalized, where you'll get time in prison. Other times it's death penalty. Other times it's criminalized but not enforced, and they kind of just look the other way. But sometimes that's dependent on connections and money, and you might still have to bribe them, and like there's different like levels to it. But it is true not you shouldn't like make them all like one entity. But also there is a consistent framework, religious framework. Well, even though there's different interpretations, none of them seem to strive from the idea that being gay is okay. And I think that is something that is consistent through many of these countries that you could look at. I don't know. Like, he's a Marxist. Why not if he just expanded it slightly to say it's American intervention and hardcore religiosity, the opiate of the masses. It could expand the perspective a bit. And I still would say that's reductive, but it's not as reductive as this.
Of course, there's always going to be people that are like that. But I also think that they do the same thing to gay people. In the same way that, like, you're looking at everybody and they actually will do it. It doesn't matter whether a gay person is a good person or not. If they're gay in that culture, they can lose their life. They can go to jail. They'll have their life completely ruined.
Okay. You understand that there's a difference between a sovereign nation state that has been a monarchy that America has like funded and allowed to foster with whatever kind of autonomy, sometimes impunity, as a matter of fact, versus like the Palestinian population, though, right?
I think that definitely there's a big difference. But what I'm saying is that I don't think that difference has been manifested. Like, the difference is that when you have a culture that is derivative off of a religion that I think is oppressive and it hasn't been modernized, you have people that are using it as a tool to oppress other people. I do genuinely think that cultures that are built off of religions like that are inferior. And I
Okay.
think that we've worked really hard to get away from that. And that work isn't done yet. I think it's still going on to this day.
Okay.
And it's
See
disappointing to me.
he's starting to dig look. So far, he's been on the open plains, and Hasan's coming over with Mongol horse archers. He's flanking him. He's fumbling. He's stumbling, but he's finally taken out a shovel and he's dug a foxhole. Now, it's not a deep foxhole. Maybe it's up to his knees, and he has to crouch down a bit, and his head still kind of pokes out. So it's not protecting him too much, but he's begun to dig a hole.
Because I've seen things go backwards a lot. I think in the last 2 years, they've gone backwards in a tremendous way. You see it on social media. I saw there was some bullshit thing about how 21% of Gen Z think Hitler had some good ideas. That's very concerning for me. It's extremely concerning.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lack of education in America. It's really bad. But once again, what you're doing is something that I see a lot, which is a conflation of conservatism and reactionary ideals with members of an entire religion. So in the United States of America, right, you have really, really freakish religious guys, right? You have people who want basically the same governance that the Taliban has over Afghanistan, but in the United States of America. There are people like that.
I think they've got a lot.
Yeah, but they make up 20% of the country max. If we're talking about people who want literally what he just described, that's still a lot. That's still disturbing. But they don't have a legislative or there's not enough of them to make up a legislative majority, to make up the presidency. They don't have enough power to make a coalition to take over the country. And they don't have general enough support amongst the population to continue that support nationally. That's why once Roe v. Wade was overturned, there was a backlash in 2020 midterms, and that might be the only thing that gets Harris, not the only thing, but one of many things, but a big contributor, Harris over the top, winning her the election. If she wins, the polling numbers right now are very neck and neck. Anything could happen.
Not in common.
Yeah,
they do. I think it's 9 out of 10.
But then in the United States of America, I'm sure plenty of religious people who are very tolerant, even if not literally pro-gay and pro-trans. Even there are non-denominational.
Occurred.
Zagazoreth got a tier 2 subscription. From Ukraine, Russia to Palestine, Israel, I am tired of hearing America bad. There needs to be more Dylan Burns and less of Hasan.
You're going to hate it when I come up and I also say America bad when it comes to a lot of things too. But I mean, it won't be the entirety of my analysis. I won't just say America bad and then blind myself to the IRGC or otherwise. I'm not saying Hasan does that, just it's an example.
Denominational Christian churches, for example,
we've seen a lot of that. And I would apply, I want to make sure that because I think a lot of times in conversations like this, there becomes this othering of Arabs or Islam. I don't really see that as an othering. I think that there's a lot of overlap between Christianity and Islam, right?
Okay.
Especially in terms of laws, etc., and things to believe. And I think that I would view a Christian, one of these super religious zealot Christian people, I would view them trying to push that on other people as the same type of basically inferior culture. I think that it is inferior. That's why we fought for years and years.
I mean, there's different.
It's
it's different in some ways, but I mean, there's the homophobic religiosity has a lot of similarities between Islam and Christianity, but it's not the same type. There's differences.
Okay, so yeah, obviously chattel slavery was justified by Christianity, and chattel slavery was abolished with liberation theology, which is also Christianity. So Christianity, religion, played a formative role in both sides of chattel slavery, both in the justification and maintenance of it, but also played a formative role.
Okay, then would we just say the type of religiosity that's in the Middle East now is inferior? Then that would be the position? You could say, okay, yes, if, for example, if you're part of a religion that believes that being, there was a part in the Mormon church, Mormon theology, where black people were angels cast from heaven for disobeying God, and their punishment was to be black. And it was like, I forget the specifics of like the entirety of the Mormon Bible story. You can look it up, but they changed it to allow Mormons into the black Mormons in, to allow black people to be Mormons. Now, I can find a new interpretation of Mormonism to maybe explain that away, but that doesn't mean that that wasn't still like a foundational problem. And that still doesn't mean that there was nothing inferior about that version of Mormonism. Or like you could say like, well, okay, it's inferior now, but it could change for the better through religion being interpreted differently. But that would have to admit that where it is now, it's not a good spot.
In the end, in the abolition of it, right?
That's true, but I want to make sure that we're...
And also, it's hard when you have a foundational document and it clearly says X is bad, kill X, to argue around that within the confines of that religion. It puts LGBT people on pretty bad religious footing when trying to make the argument. Now, people interacting with the day-to-day realities of living next to gay people, of them being actually not that mean to them, and then, oh, they're not different than what I was told about, and they're not demonic, and they're not hurting my children, they just want to be themselves, etc., etc. That can have an effect on them that could make it so they have to find religious justifications for it. Maybe someone really does stumble upon, oh my gosh, I found this one bad, but when the religion clearly says XYZ, it puts them on a bad footing.
Drawing a distinction real quick between following a religion and then having a government that is a religious theocracy that bases its laws off of that religion. I think that most people that are of any religion just want to be able to get along. Okay. I think that's very much true. So, but the problem is that if you have a government that is based off of that religion, I can't think of a single government that's based off of a religion that isn't bad.
Well, I mean, Americans are the American Republican Party is desperately trying to bring that back as best as they can.
One of the best
they're trying to make them
best aspects of our society, definitely for the time, was us to distinctly write these separations of church and state and putting religious liberty with a secular state. Like these were banger American things that we put in early on, and I hated to see people trying to smash up those dividers and saying actually the founders were really no. I love it. It keeps, and plus, and here's the religious argument for it. The last thing you want is government, with all of government's problems, taking your foundational texts wrote by God and having their interpretations be what's enforceable. It's not smart. Live religion your own life. Don't have government breathing down your neck telling you how to worship God or how God should be worshipped or what things you need to do to please God. Please them in your own life.
They've made it legal to teach that it's mandatory now to teach the Bible in Oklahoma.
Yes. So
you saw that.
Yeah, I did. So you understand that those are people.
I think when you go to the kingdom of heaven, it's going to be like, we were going to let you in, but you forgot to call Steve the F slur that one day, or like, it was, you didn't vote for that politician who wanted to ban the gays. I'm sorry, you just got to,
well,
to hell you go.
Some of which are genuine like religious zealots, and others who are simply utilizing religion as a galvanizing factor to be like, see, I'm a religious person, right? Like,
I think
people have different aspirations. People have different motivations for why they advocate for certain things. Okay. So that very same principle,
that's very common, that people use religion as a tool to, like kind of enable that type of.
Believe whatever you want to believe, but if you're switching up this fast, you're no different from Hasan. You believe whatever is convenient. Ooh, gosh, Drowning Dream. Is that a reference to me? Oh, you guys know, you guys are debating in chat. You guys have vicious debates in gutter chat. This is why it's good to be in site chat. They're civilized down there. They're civilized down there in site chat. Good civilized people spamming the best emotes. Well, not spamming them, but posting them slowly because it's a reserved crowd. And by reserved, I mean you guys are very stubborn in Twitch chat, but I'm not moving. Site chat's on screen forever.
The behavior.
Great. So, so herein lies the problem. Mm-hmm. That very same principle exists in the Muslim world, which is endlessly diverse. And there are, it's the fastest growing religion. It is. I think it might have actually overtaken Christianity in terms of numbers.
Can I just say, if it's the fastest growing religion, and it should be kind of indicative on you if there is a problem with religiosity in that religion, homophobic religiosity, to call it out and not just say it's the West's fault every time. I will throw that out there.
1.6 billion now. That's
And
the
yes,
number I last heard.
and
Yeah.
religious governance differs from country to country. I'm Turkish. I come from a country that is nowhere near as fundamentalist. It's supposed to be secular. Obviously, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is very similar to Donald Trump in terms of how he utilized Islam to make himself, to give himself a more prominent role in Turkish society, was able to both bastardize religion and also simultaneously use it for social repression, social oppression, and cultural repression in general. So I personally understand I've withstood the direct consequences of that, of a society being redesigned. And perhaps that is the reason why I know that there's a difference between simply monolithizing an entire religion versus people who are championing religion, Islam in this case, to meet their own authoritarian governance demands. And that's simply what it is. A lot of people don't like the way that their government operates. There are gay Muslims, there are queer Muslims, there are queer trans people. They have unfortunately.
Somebody just said that he says that the Houthi pirate guy later is just like Anne Frank. No, he doesn't say that. I don't believe you. No, he wouldn't say that. He wouldn't. No, he wouldn't say that. I don't. He's too smart for that. There's no.
Fortunately, not had any breathing room to be able to advocate for civil rights in many parts of this region, because they have been consistently pushed back against, and also don't have any fucking time or space to be able to do such a thing when they're under direct occupation. That's the issue.
But would you come to the same conclusion that basing decisions off of that religion and making laws based off of that religion is a bad thing?
Yeah, of course. I don't. What do you mean?
Okay.
I don't agree in theocracy at all.
Awesome. But wouldn't that mean that it would be inferior? Or,
no, I wouldn't say that any culture is inferior to one another. I would, however, say that especially as it pertains to Palestinians, the reason why I don't think it's
okay, if you're gonna say that in its entirety, no culture is inferior to each other, or you if you because each aspects of the culture, you could find cultures maybe where majority aspects about it you'd like less than another culture. Maybe you could find stuff like that, but in its entirety, you can't say it. So just judging it like that is not fair. I see this is a perspective that I think is defensible, that you can find some ground in. But if what he's saying here is, number one, that it's inferior to be theocratic compared to not theocratic, then an extreme amount of religiosity in a culture would be inferior to the system that you want. So just by definition, that would be inferior, at least from certainly from a Marxist worldview, if Hasan is any type of traditional Marxist. So then it would be inferior. But you could just say that, well, no, it's not that their culture as entirety is inferior, it's that this one aspect is inferior. But even if they have this one bad aspect, that doesn't mean they don't have humanity. There's still an argument to be made here, but, dig a better trench, dig a better foxhole. That's what I'm saying.
Inferior over the one another is that inferiority is a very dangerous and treacherous language to utilize, especially when there are hundreds of thousands of dead and wounded people that are in the crosshairs of.
So good catch from Chatty. Earlier said that different European cultures were inferior to the Ottoman Empire. So what's the standard here? It really just feels like West/America bad here, because if we're saying we can call the Western cultures inferior, but we're not going to call again, just saying that any culture is inferior to another one because in its entirety it all has beautiful aspects, and say the fucking hippie shit, and then pivot into, but of course, homophobic aspects of culture are inferior because of how it discriminates against people for loving who they want to love and being who they are. Like, just, it's not that, it's not hard, but you don't need to just simp for the Middle East just on principle for no reason when it doesn't deserve the simpage, because they, just like every other continent, have religious problems with homophobia. But they aren't just born out of the West. Religion wasn't just born out of the West. Islam has a very deep and complex and many times beautiful, horrific, and disturbing and history. You know, it has all sorts of history attached to it. It's very complex. Let's not just simplify it to like ignore it.
Of Israeli violence.
I think that it so
works.
If this is a semantics issue, and if like me saying inferior, if you think that that's dehumanizing or problematic.
If anybody says questions the beautiful part, look at calligraphy, look at the mosques, look at the what faith can inspire in people. There are many things that are beautiful about religion as well.
Then I don't necessarily completely agree, but I can see where you're coming from.
Well, the reason
I would say worse, or you could.
I'm being told on YouTube right now that my guys are getting Trump ads. So thank you, Donald Trump, for the $5 or maybe like a nickel that I made from that. Thank you, appreciate it.
That with any other word that is just like not as good as.
Yeah,
but of course that doesn't represent.
But even
the
then,
people,
it doesn't matter, because then there's something that's better, right? The problem is American culture or like American actions are not necessarily better. That's my point.
They
on
are.
The basis of like on the basis
it's not
of,
even a question. If you have a country and a culture that allows somebody to get killed for their sexual orientation, that is a worse culture than a culture that doesn't.
I think that
there's no other way to look at it.
You make a stronger argument, say not allow somebody to get killed, because then like there might be like, I don't know, some like way I could try to weasel out of it, because this is really basic. You shouldn't have, there should be no weaseling here. Just say like a country that by definition kills a gay once they find it is better than a country that does not do it. Like it's, when it comes to this policy, okay, I'm not talking about their inflation policy or their policy on, I don't know, sponsoring the arts, but on this area, it's bad. It's bad, it's bad, it's bad, it's worse. And by worse, another way to say that could be inferior, even though the word has bad connotations to it.
So here's the thing. There's something that we do in the United States of America, or in the Western world especially, that creates this veneer, this aesthetic that we are somehow morally more progressive and more superior than other countries. I'll give you an example of I can talk about like gay rights in general, but beyond gay rights, one thing that I could talk about especially is
why go beyond gay rights? Stay in gay rights. That's the discussion. Why would you? I could talk about gay rights, the topic of this discussion, but how about we pivot to something completely different? Why?
For example, slavery, right?
Sure.
We often talk about gulags and slave labor being done in the USSR, in the Orient, like all the way over there, and how damaging that is.
Don't somehow screw this up, man. Don't say gulags are the same as American prisons. You're like, oh, don't you do it. Don't you do it. Being arrested and being put in prison for basic opposition to the current government is different, and putting them into hard labor is different than the American penal system. The American penal system has a lot of problems. I don't believe in the death penalty. I believe our penal system needs great reforms. I think that someone should not feel like it's a living hell in the prison system. I think that, of course, it doesn't need to be like a grand old time or even carnival rides and fucking PlayStation 2s or whatever, or PlayStation 5s, you know, the most modern ones. But let's not make these comparisons. Let's not do it. I don't want to get down into that. I don't want to get down into like, let's talk about the gulag and how brutal it was and how it left people broken. Let's not do this. Let's not.
In Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, whereas slavery is literally codified in the American Constitution under
like, why not just like start with anti-black racism? There were still problems with anti-black racism in the Soviet Union, by the way. Okay, just because they did like a song and dance about it on like screen, and they made like explicitly anti-racist movies as part of Soviet production. And so there was like promotion of anti-racist activities, but like there was still a racism problem in the Soviet Union. Okay. Why not choose something like a stronger ground? Why go straight to the criminal justice system? The Soviet criminal justice system was brutal.
the 13th Amendment. It's just that slavery is appropriate as a mechanism of punishment for those who have done crimes. Another great example of this is bribery, right? We often look at like the barbaric nature of like Pakistani society or Indian society where bribery thrives.
Sure.
There's so much corruption. It's bribery. We have codified bribery.
I'm sorry about this too, because there's a problem when it comes to, you know, political PACs or whatever, and, you know, the allowance of these big companies. But the basic corruption of you driving to work, a cop pulls you over, you give me like $200 and I might let you go. Like that type of corruption versus the type of like state political buying of ads and like the influence that the big money can have. These are two different types of corruption that have different effects, different cultural impacts. And like, I think that the more personal corruption is more damaging on people's day-to-day lives than the type of corruption that we allow in the United States. That's not to say that it isn't bad. It's just that, honestly, live in a country where it's often that you have to pay off the cops, where it's often that you have to pay to get fines in order just to open a business, pay like bribes in order to just operate in an area, pay bribes to live in a culture that you have to deal with that. For example, Assad, Syria. And then compare that to the American form of bribery and political influence, which is also a question in many other countries about how much can businesses influence campaigning. That's an open question. I think I lean on the side of it should be very little, if at all, but that's still a very different type of corruption that has different solutions than the very up in your face corruption that it's like normalized to an extent where they're basically taking money out of your pocket and that's just the perks of the job.
Under
was it lobbying?
Under legal terms, exactly.
Right.
Lobbying.
Okay. So I
like let's not reduce all of our problems and just pretend like there's no differences, there's no advantage. Because if we pretend that the problem is something that it isn't, or try to downplay other countries' corruption problems, then I feel like we're not really informing people. We're actually leaving people dumber than when we started the conversation.
see your point of view, but I don't agree with you about the slavery point. They used to take black people's teeth out of their mouths so they would give them to white people. We don't do that even to prisoners.
No, I know, but it's still, but slavery is still an inhumane practice, right? Like you understand that, you agree with that.
I do, but I'm saying that the level and the severity of like the American like transatlantic slave trade is like several measures of worse than the way that prisoners are treated here.
Of course. No, chattel slavery is a unique evil, and every single historian will agree with you on that front, that many cultures have practiced slavery throughout time, none of which as uniquely evil as chattel slavery, because there is obviously a like scientific racial aspect to it in terms of like indentured servitude. Indentured servitude, for example, did not mean that like your next of kin was also enslaved in a similar fashion, whereas chattel slavery is different because if you're black, that means you are inhumane. It means you're inferior. And the point I was going to make is that
there was a really brutal slavery process during the expansion of Christianity as well. Like when you talk about like you're allowed to slave the enemy as long as they're of a different religion, and that it was pretty brutal. It was like whatever. I don't want to get into it.
Sure.
I don't want to do a slavery tier list on stream. This feels like a bad idea.
Ironically enough, whether you recognize it or not, the exact same arguments and sentiments were expressed towards black people during chattel slavery in an effort to justify their continued enslavement, that they were inferior.
Can you elaborate on that? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Black people were perceived in an effort to continue in American culture.
By the way, whatever. I don't want to get too. We were only like 55 minutes in, and I'm not watching this full thing. So let's just keep watching and see if we can get anything, juice this for anything else, because I don't want to just keep repeating myself in different ways.
American society in the Western world in an effort to continue the dominance of black people, in an effort to continue.
Somebody just redeemed for 100,000 bits, not 100,000 bits, 100,000 channel points. Call into the show. What do you want to call about? What do you want to talk about?
their subjugation, the Americans, or at least like people in positions of power, were like, we need a way to make this appropriate, to make this justifiable, to make this permissible.
Oh,
Because,
I mean, like,
because
well,
otherwise, if people start recognizing that these are human beings and not simply fucking capital, not simply, animals or something even worse than animal, then they're going to start feeling bad, and people are going to fuck up the bag.
It isn't new, right? It's not new. It wasn't the succession of kings back in the day. It was the divine succession of kings.
No, yes and no. So the reason why I'm saying this, because we both recognize the uniqueness of chattel slavery.
You're saying that there is a religious justification that was created so it could be justified that you could do this.
I'm not even talking about the religious justification. No, I'm talking about scientific,
like a moral one?
Scientific justification.
Like eugenics.
Yes, eugenics. Which is now seen as a
pseudoscience.
False science, as pseudoscience.
Yeah.
Wait, that's not a call-in. You just asked a question. But I'll answer it. The question is, do you think the USA is sending THAAD to protect the weather controlling machines? And my answer is, of course. Of course. What else could they be doing? There's no other possible explanation.
That was specifically created and designed in an effort to look at this racialized form of violence and justify it. And in that process at the time, or rather the reason why they went to that justification was because, if they were to do this on religious boundaries or on ethnic boundaries, as they had done previously in previous societies, whether it be like the Romans or the Greeks or any other form of like indentured servitude that was practiced in other cultures and other civilizations, you could not engage in the continued dominance of black people that way, because what if they become Christian, right? Or when you bring black people here, they learn the culture, they can they can integrate into society inevitably. So in order to create this like continued dominance, they sought out the scientific, in air quotes, the pseudoscientific understanding of black inferiority, African inferiority. Their culture is barbaric.
I think, are you trying to draw a parallel between like the eugenics argument for like subjugating black people and my argument for saying that like the like a religious theocracy is inferior? Is that kind of like where you're going?
Where I'm going is that in order for Western cultures, in order for Western nations to continue their dominance over other nation states, there is a direct through line of creating an air of inferiority while simultaneously destabilizing these places in an effort to maintain their underdeveloped status, which oftentimes will result in people behaving in more violent manners.
If you fuck with people, they're not going to like it.
Yes.
I agree with you. I think that's very true. Absolutely. I don't really think that there's really much of a disagreement there. I think that like absolutely that's what's happened. But if I'm looking at it from like my point of view, I do think that like the culture that we have is a better culture. I don't think that you can compare it to eugenics. I don't think you can say like, for example, like with eugenics where they're like comparing like shapes of somebody's skull or something like that versus like whether somebody is allowed to be gay or not without being prosecuted or killed. I don't really think that these two things are equivalent. I think that one of them is absolutely a lot worse.
No,
it's much more.
I'm simply mentioning the rhetoric that is utilized in this process. Like one of the examples is like the indigenous population, right? Which is
like Native Americans.
Yes, which is ironic that we're having this conversation today. A lot of the early justifications of settler colonial violence was met with, well, the natives are barbaric. The indigenous population is killing one another. They're practicing bloodletting. They're cannibals and whatnot. Some of which was not true at all, and others that might have been true. Now,
Well, there's a lot of it that was true. I mean, they did
Now-
some crazy shit down there.
So ultimately,
Down
it
there.
still does not justify the inhumane and horrific practice of full-scale genocide, which is infinitely more barbaric than anything that you could basically
Spicy moment at 3:02. Okay, we'll watch a little bit more and then we'll skip to 3:02 and probably shut this down because I am not watching this in its entirety. Oh my God, it's 3 hours, man. 3.5 hours. It's just not worth it. Just not worth it. We've probably heard everything we're going to hear from like what their general perspectives are.
say about the indigenous population, right?
I would say to an extent, yeah. Like if you want to talk about like how the Spanish treated them, yeah, it was really bad.
Okay, so it's
Sure.
a far greater evil, right? Like
Right.
instead of fostering a non-hostile relationship with the indigenous population and collaborating with them, instead of doing that, full-scale domination and ethnic cleansing was the far worse evil in that process, right? Because human beings are still human beings at the end of the day. You can like reason with them, you can talk to them. There is no greater evil in terms of like evil Olympics. Like genocide is up there. It's the worst thing you can
What are
do
we
to
doing
an
right
entire
now?
group of people.
Why are we doing this?
You're totally right. I completely agree with you because
Evil
like, yeah, you can't
Olympics.
talk to them or anything like that. But what I'm saying is that I think that those people were killing others of them all the time. Like they were doing that too. This is, I mean, we're doing an evil tier list, right?
Yeah.
And so like you're saying that this one is kind of a little bit worse than the others. And,
No,
and I
not a
think that
little bit. No. I think far worse.
Okay.
Far more
I mean,
damaging.
that's
far more
fine.
damaging historically and throughout time. Like, I guess my argument is like, I
Yeah.
don't care if, like, for example, Jewish people in the Holocaust, like if they were homophobic, for example, like I don't think that would justify the Holocaust.
No.
You agree
Obviously
with that,
not.
right? Okay.
Yeah, of course not.
Then what your statements about Palestinian culture and the reason why a lot of people on Twitter are mad at you now is a similar sentiment being expressed, whether it was inadvertent or not, that their inferior culture is being wiped out and you don't care if an inferior culture is being wiped out. Like that's
I'm not going to support a culture that demonizes and
See, this is the problem is when he says support in what? It's not like when people are protesting for Palestine, they're not protesting for Palestine because they're homophobic. Most people protesting for Palestine because they believe the Palestinians deserve a state, they deserve basic human decency, they deserve to be able to govern themselves, not be bombed every day. Now, there might be disagreement on how to get there. There might be disagreement about what's feasible and what's not feasible. But that's the general consensus if you were to look for the broadest strokes to try to unite all the... You can't unite them all because they all have different beliefs. Some extreme, some less extreme. But the broad consensus, that's what's needed. So I don't see why, like, somebody says support them in what way. Like, for example, supporting Ukraine against Russian invasion because of the homophobia. I'm just repeating what I said earlier. But like supporting the Sudanese in their time of extreme bloodletting, or the people of Myanmar, or the Americans during the revolution. Like there's if the outcome is better, or it's pushing the people forward, or it allows their people to have some basic decency, I think that you can support them in the achievement of those goals. If in the next 3 months there was a massive civil war in Saudi Arabia that was tearing the nation in half, like if someone said, "Do you support the Saudis?" I support them in getting peace. I support an end to this war. I support some deal or something. I support I would still support the Saudis and their achievement of something better than the current status quo. So it's a question of like, when you say I don't support them, you don't support them in what way? So you don't support them relative to what? If someone asked me, do you support the Russians right now? I would think it's in the context of, the current war. So I won't support the Russians. But if someone asked me, do you support them in having, better homes and better civil liberties? But of course.
kills people for their identity. I'm never going to support a culture that does that. It doesn't matter whether it's Christian, Islamic, or anything, atheist. Any time that a culture is killing people for their identity, that culture is evil.
Okay.
and they are committing an act of evil. It's completely indefensible.
Well, you know, I think there are some issues with that sentiment, especially when you compare, for example, what the American government did in World War II. We support the Allied forces. We root for easy company, as my friend Felix Biederman always says, regardless of how America was segregated at the time, an incredibly unfair and inhumane practice, right? Americans were not exactly woke on gay people at the time. Americans were not exactly woke on black people at the time. There were horrifying things that we did to black soldiers in the aftermath of World War II, as a matter of fact.
And we've gotten a lot better.
By the way, but I'm going to hear so much of just the existence of the Ukrainian far right is part of the reason as to why we can't assist them with like, Ukraine's not great in the gays either. Ukraine has a problem with like far right, like street thugs. That is a problem. But they also have like next to zero political influence.
Sense.
But no,
And so I don't know if if we're applying the standard equally, like why is that used as a justification as to why we cannot assist them in defending themselves and keeping up our previous commitments to them?
But hold on. But ultimately, right? We still celebrate the Allied forces and their accomplishments in World War II, right? In defeating Adolf Hitler and liberating these concentration camps. The problem is, in terms of like the analysis,
I got this comment from chat. It says, "Okay, I get it. Both these guys are cooked." Okay. You guys just want to skip to the thing? Let's skip to the thing later. Okay, well, let's skip to the thing later. Somebody says it was at, what was it? 3. What was the cooked section? So what was the thing I wanted to see? I think somebody said 302. Was it? Yes, 302:45. Let's see.
For your fucking humanitarian aid, they don't give a shit. Like it's the same as any other kind of person. I talked to a teenager from Yemen, okay, who everyone called, myself included, called Timothy Charlemagne or Chalamet.
Is that the One Piece one?
Yeah, exactly.
The One Piece
this
one.
kid,
That's all they know about
like,
him, man. Just great journalistic vigor, man.
I think he was like 19 at the time when I talked to him. Which means that for most of his life, he has withstood genocide, right? Like he is a person whose only experience is like, it's literally like talking to fucking Anne Frank.
Is that in reference to the bombing? Oh, he did say it. It's like talking to Anne Frank. I'm sorry. Let me hear this again.
Of his life, he has, when I talked to him, which means that for most of his life, he has withstood genocide, right? Like he is a person whose only experience is like, it's literally like talking to fucking Anne Frank, basically. Okay. Being able to talk to Anne Frank.
He really said it. Okay. So here's a few problems with this comparison. Number one, Anne Frank did not have a like religious zealot militia behind them full of hundreds of thousands of people with missiles that are taking out cargo ships and shit. Like, I don't, Anne Frank wasn't seizing any ships. I'm sorry. What do I do with this? What do I do with this? What am I supposed to say to this? What's my commentary I give to this? So like when he even says genocide, like comparing these two types of war to each other, no, it's not. I reject the premise in its entirety. He is a Houthi in Yemen, okay? He is a Houthi in Yemen. They were not facing the same type of campaign as the Jews were in Europe. They just weren't. There's not the mass SX execution squads dumping them in mass graves with systematic work camps gassing them all to death. They have a giant militia fighting for them, trying to take over Yemen. That's not a comparison. It's not. The Jews never took Berlin. That didn't happen. Why make this comparison? Why make this comparison? Taiwan is like the South during the Civil War. The Houthi guy I interviewed that said like curse to the Zion, that says curse be upon the Jews, and that every Zionist should be impaled on a stake, is just like Anne Frank. Like, it's no, man. No, he is not like Anne Frank. He is not like Anne Frank.
In real time. That's all he's known is death and destruction of his home, right? With American bombs.
But
Imagine if in my interview with the right sector guy, I didn't bring up like the violence towards homosexuals, or I didn't bring up like the ultranationalism, and I just focused on what his favorite cartoon. I like Dexter's Laboratory, you know, like what? That's what I concentrated on. Just, and then like, if that's what happened, I'd be embarrassed to mention the interview. I'd be embarrassed. And I'm like, that's not to say that there's not a context where you can examine those aspects. It's just you want to paint a picture for your audience that is encompassing of a full picture, of their beliefs, of their perspectives, of what they're striving for, what their aims are. And when you just say that, like, that guy who supports and is part of a movement that has hundreds of thousands of armed men that are trying to take over Yemen, they're firing rockets into the sea to try to blow up container ships, to look at that and say that's like Anne Frank because they got bombed by the Saudis a lot. That's not what the Holocaust was about, man. It's not. The Holocaust wasn't just about. Like, I don't want to get into it, man. It's just oof.
He's not getting killed by gay people, right? He's not getting killed. Like if he's talking about like
we're not even talking about gay people. I'm going to bring up something important here. First of all, he wasn't Houthi. I asked him. He's like, I'm not.
Saying anything.
Which many people said, oh, he's
no self-critique there. Like Anne Frank. The Saudi bombing campaign in Yemen was horrific, but it's not the Holocaust. That's not to say, like, I'm not diminishing it, but it's just definitionally not the same type of campaign. It's not the same type of thing. His chat's an emote only? Oh, no. Okay, well, then we're done. We're done. Okay, we're done. We're done. I'm not doing it anymore. I need to get back to the front. I need to get back to filming. I need to take the time that I have here and put it to use. If you want to support me in that goal, you can donate at DylanBurns.tv. You can join site chat and be chatting on screen, have your messages on screen. Look at Moongazer. Western culture is more inclusive and has raised the living standards of the people better than Middle Eastern culture has. You can get great commentary from Moongazer. And Locker, good night, Dylan. Have a nice sleep. I like that comment better.